All right, welcome. Chapter 1 of Excel 2016. This splash page here is talking about the first chapter. We're going to discuss what a spreadsheet is. We'll talk about specifically how Excel is laid out, the different parts of the window. And then we'll begin to talk about formulas, which kind of are how calculations get made and how things happen. So we'll talk about what they are, and then over here on the right you'll see we'll also enter and edit them. We'll edit the entries in a cell, and then we'll look at some other things like how you can make the worksheet look on your computer and how you can make it look on paper if you want to print it out. Okay, so moving down to the first page, I'm clicking the little down arrow here and getting to my two-page spread. Let me go back to the early days. People used to do keep track of money stuff in these big books, these big ledger books, and the earliest spreadsheet programs were in the 80s and 90s. There were old ones called Paradox and Lotus 123 and some other things like that. Microsoft came along and it was pretty widespread by the early mid-90s. And so for the last 20 years, there have just been different versions of Microsoft Excel. They used to have numbers like Excel version 1, version 2, version 5. And then they started naming them after years. So there was Excel 2003, 2007, 2010, 2013, and now we're up to 2016. After the 2003 version, when they moved to the 2007, a lot of stuff about this part up here at the top changed. They started using this layout that their term for it is the ribbon, and I guess they just mean that it goes across the top in a row like a ribbon being laid out. And the way it works is you've got these tabs that like home, insert, page layout, and you can imagine if this is one continuous thing, if it spills off the screen over here to the right, you have to click the next tab to see the next set of tools. So as you keep going along, it's jumping you over so you can find more controls here that let you do different things. The terminology that I'm going to use is the Microsoft terminology that they use in the book. So when I say go to the ribbon, I mean swing your mouse up here. When I say go to the home tab, this is it. If I say go to the data tab, you'd click here. Then within each tab there are these little lines that separate areas. They call each area a group. So this is the sort and filter group on the data tab. This is the page setup group on the page layout tab. So everything has a group that it's sitting in and also a tab that it's sitting on, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Now I'm on the insert tab, I'm in the charts group, and I'm pointing at a button for, if you hold your mouse without clicking on it, little tips pop up that tell you what the heck you're pointing at. So this is the column or bar chart button on the charts group of the insert tab. So when you hear me say things like that, like, you know, you'll have to go over to the review tab, that means come up here and click on the word review. Then in Excel, and in these later versions of Excel, the file, what used to be called the file menu, behaves differently from all the others. Here I've got a bunch of stuff down here in my worksheet, and you can see the stuff stays there no matter where I click up here, but the exception is the file one. When I click on that, suddenly it hides all that other stuff, and you think, oh, what happened? I lost my work. But it's still there. When you click on the file menu, it takes you into this behind the scenes, or what they in the book call the backstage view. So this backstage view is where you can do sort of the nuts and bolts things like saving and saving as, printing, where you would go to close the file if you were done. And so while you're back here, you can do all of the things that are located on this tab, and then when you want to go back to your spreadsheet again, click this little arrow button and it'll take you back to these other parts of the ribbon. So the file one is the only one that acts weird and jumps you out, and then the arrow takes you back. So a spreadsheet is one of these. A sheet is made of little boxes, and every little box is at the corner. Think of it like streets and avenues. So that means that every box has an address. This one is at the corner of column I and row 9. So its address is I9. Okay? This cell, they call it a cell, the little box. So this cell is at the corner of K and 5. The letter comes first. So this cell is K5. Everybody with me on that? Okay, so what's this cell address?
B3.
Right, so that's B3, and this one is
G12.
Okay. So whenever you, so to begin with, terminology, cells, little boxes, the little boxes. Cell addresses are things like, for example, A3, G13, whatever. So those are cell addresses. And then we're quickly going to get to, when we get to talking about formulas, so let me just talk about how this is laid out besides the ribbon. We've got the grid down here, or the workbook itself. Up at the very top, we've got this thing called the title bar. You'll see whatever your file is named. In Windows, if you hold down, if you ever want to get to this view and see your files, you can get to it by going to get to what's called Windows Explorer. You hold down the window key on your keyboard, and then you tap the letter E, if I can type. So window plus E, if you hold, the window key is between Control and Alt on the left side. If you hold that thing down and tap the letter E, it opens Windows Explorer. There are other ways to get to it, but that's the quickest. When you open Windows Explorer, the way your computer is organized, they have this general file cabinet called Computer, and then they put a letter onto each of the drawers in the computer. So usually every computer in Windows is going to have what's called the C drive. That's the thing that physically is located in your computer. Every one of these things has a letter, and so they're organized. When you see OS Disk C, that's the one that's physically in your computer, and there's a bunch of stuff in it. The way Windows Explorer is set up, again, we've got sides. The left side, if you click on it, the right side shows you what's inside that. So if I click on C, the right side shows me what's inside that. There are also these little triangle things that you can expand, and you'll notice that these are the folder names, and they are the same as these over here on the right. So if you click on a folder over here on the left side, like this or this, over here on the right you'll see whatever is inside that folder. And as you go along, like if I go into the shares drive and then into all RSSP and then into, I'm just picking a place that I usually go to save stuff. Okay. As I get farther and farther down and I've clicked and gone into something, and then I've gone into something inside that, and I'm going down these kind of layers, is the way you could think of it. Up along the top of Windows Explorer, it's keeping track of where I am, like a trail of breadcrumbs, starting with the letter, like the drawer, and then the top level file, and then a sub file, and then a sub file, like folders within folders. And that's how you can think about where you're storing any piece of information, any file that you're storing on your computer is going to be somewhere in one of these directories. Then when you finally get down to the last folder, finally you open that folder and you've got maybe some other folders, but you also have individual things that are not folders. These are like the pieces of paper or the documents that are sitting in those folders. So we call them files. That's a PDF file. You'll notice it ends with PDF. it opens with Acrobat. This is an Excel or a comma-separated values file that will open with Excel. You can sort of see that it will open with Excel. And there are just different kinds of files that open. Like this one ends with .doc. It opens with Microsoft Word. So there are just different sorts of files that run in different programs, and they're all stored somewhere under my computer, under computer, if that makes sense. What we're doing here, when you use a spreadsheet, similarly to the way things are stored in Microsoft, the spreadsheet itself has a file name and is stored somewhere. The difference between saving and saving as is that when you save something, you keep the same title and the same location in your file structure. When you go to File Save As, it gives you a chance to make a copy of it either in a different place or with a different name. So when I go to Save As, the first thing they're going to ask me to do when I get to that page, I'm going to jump ahead to the next page for a second. When they want me to save it as something else, and they give me the name of what they want me to call it, then I'll go back to my spreadsheet, and they want me to call it Project Leader Payroll Calculator. So when I go to Save As, I won't be changing the location, but I will be changing the name. And when I save as, it won't delete the thing I started with. It'll make another one and give it a different name or put it in a different place. But the thing I started with will still be there. That's important. Another important concept to know. The difference between copying something and moving it. Okay, so I've already taken care of the first couple of things for us and opened the first thing called EX11. These are all things you can do with Excel. I've got a couple of examples. Like here's one that happened in the housing area. Eddie Simmons wanted to keep track of all the linen orders that were coming and going out of the different units, because he was finding a suspicious thing that when they would send out 5,000 towels, they would get back some number that was not as much from the laundry vendor. And so in order for him to be able to say to them, well, we gave you this many, but you gave us back 50 fewer, he had to have a spreadsheet like this to keep track of what went out which week, and then he could easily go back to them and say, well, it looks like here's the difference in how much we're getting back from you guys. So somebody's taking our towels. It's easy to organize information in it. You can explain by putting these labels in here what this column means, right? Just having the numbers without being able to see this stuff, like if I hide this, it doesn't let you know what you're talking about, right? But if you put the labels in there, then you start to understand, okay, I understand what these numbers are doing. It would be useful even if it was just a way, like a graph paper that you could write information in. But the power of it is that you can use formulas to add different things up or subtract or multiply or divide or do other sort of mathematical things. And the nice thing about Excel is that it makes it easy to set up your calculation and then not have to change your calculation even if the values that it's adding up change. Different parts of the window, I talked about the step of doing the save as. So to do that, we're going to click on the file menu. Our work seems to go away. Don't panic. You're in Backstage View. Go down here and click Save As, and it tries to be helpful and say, here's where we are now. Do you want to change location, in which case you would choose Browse, or do you want to stay here? We're just going to stay here in the current folder. So go ahead and click on Excel Module 1, and now it takes you to the thing where it says, okay, do you want to keep the same name or do you want to call it something else? If you were trying to keep the same name, you'd have to move it to a different place. You can't have two things in the same place with the same name. You can have two things with the same name in different places. So in this case, since we're staying in the same spot, we're going to give it a different name. And the name they suggest in the book is EX1 Project Leader Payroll Calculator. And again, don't worry about your spelling. This is just for you. It's not going to, nobody's going to come along and check your work. Once you've typed in the name that you want, you can see where it's located. It's in this thing called Excel Module 1. And that's all you have to do. Go ahead and hit save. Now look at the title bar up at the top. You'll see that the title has changed, and now it reflects the name that you just gave it. So there's the title bar. I'm just going to point at other areas and give a brief description of what they are. This little thing, and notice the tip that pops up, it says name box, or it tries to say name box. This area right here is called the formula bar. This is an important concept. Down below here in the worksheet area, you kind of see the answers to the math problems. If there are any math problems in here, here's where you see the answers. Up here is where you see the problem itself. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Down here in the lower right corner, there's a plus and a minus zoom. If you use the plus sign, it'll make it look bigger. So if I make a formula, in Excel, every formula, don't ask me why, begins with the equal sign. That's just a signal to the program that, hey, we're calculating something. So if I just type in equals 5 plus 9, then it's going to add 5 and 9 together when I hit enter. And I get 14. Okay, so it took, and if I click on that cell, so what I typed was, again, equals 5 plus 9, enter. All right. So I see the answer, 14, down below. Up here in the formula bar, I see equals 5 plus 9. So you see what I'm saying? There are kind of two layers. This is the result, and this is the formula. So the formula bar, that's a very simple formula, but you can at least get the concept that there's more to this than meets the eye. In other words, if I click in a different cell and I just type the number 14 and hit enter, that cell is just the number 14. If I look in the formula bar, it's just the number 14. There's no calculation going on. Here, there's actually a calculation going on behind the scenes. Now you know the most important thing about Excel. You're already, you're 50% of the way there. Because everything in a worksheet or a workbook is either just what it appears to be, data, or it's calculated. So if you look over the stuff here, that's just the guy's name. This is just somebody data entered 40 hours. Somebody data entered 4 hours. Maybe it came over from CalTime or something. Here somebody data entered what their hourly wage is. But here, when you get to the regular pay, it's a calculation, right? Which is just what you'd expect. They have to multiply their straight time hours by their hourly rate to get this, right? So up above here, you see that it's calculating. But notice it's not saying equals 40 times 16.75. What's it saying instead? It's multiplying the places in the spreadsheet. It's multiplying B5 times D5. That's powerful because that means that if you were just putting in equals 40 times 1675, okay, you'd get the right answer. But if you multiply the places, B5 times D5, then what happens is, if his hourly rate changes, or if he works a different number of straight time hours, this is going to change. Okay, so this says 670, right? So if he only works 35 hours, it drops right away. Because it's not multiplying the number, it's multiplying whatever's in that place. Okay? So if this becomes 40 again, it'll jump back to 670. If his hourly rate changes, if he's making $30 an hour, would be nice. Then, yeah, his regular pay is going to jump. Okay, so I just did something in my spreadsheet and I want to undo it. There is a button up here called undo, but on the keyboard, the undo key is, and I like my keyboard shortcuts. Undo, if I can type it, undo is Control plus Z. So that will undo whatever you just did. It's a great friend. So if I want to take his hourly rate back down to what it was, I Control Z, and it undoes whatever I just did. Okay? All right. So now you've gotten the second most important thing about Excel. The first important thing is that you can have calculations up top that give you an answer down below. The second important thing about Excel is that when you make a calculation, usually you'll want to use the cell addresses in your formula instead of numbers. And you can see why, right? Because then if I just written this with numbers, then when this changed, I'd have to come over here and change this. But since I used places, if this changes, I don't have to change anything. It keeps working. Okay? So of course, for my regular straight time pay, it's going to multiply my straight time hours. For my OT pay, it looks like if we take just what it says in the formula. So what's that formula telling us? How is he getting paid for overtime? Is he getting time and a half?
It's double time.
So it's whatever's in C, the number of hours, times 2 times whatever's in D. All right. So if I wanted it to calculate based on time and a half, how would I change this formula?
You got to go back and put 1.5.
Right. That would just get replaced by 1.5. The cell pointer is the rectangle that shows you which cell you're in. Where's my cell pointer right now?
F6.
F6. Good answer. Okay. Sheet tabs. Oh, the cell pointer, whichever one it's in, is considered the active cell. Notice down below, in the left corner, it says ready. What happens if I click on the formula box? Down here it says edit. I'm now in edit mode. And things look weird down here. They do this helpful thing where they color code. Where I click up here on the formula, and I'm in edit mode, it highlights in different colors the different cells that I'm referencing, that I'm referring to over here. So C6 gets highlighted and D6 gets highlighted. So it gives me a quick visual about what I'm dealing with. Okay, so there's the difference between edit mode, where I'm in the middle of something up here, and just regular ready mode. Let's play a little bit with how you use the keyboard in Excel. First off, if I click up here in the formula bar, I can type something. If I start typing something in here that doesn't work in my formula, it's just gonna, if I type a word, something, Excel says, what are you doing? You can't calculate the word something in a math problem. What's going on here? So then I would say, okay, my bad, sorry about that, and get rid of the word something. But if I'm over here on this, where it's just a number without an equal sign, then I could do whatever I want. Right? It doesn't have a problem with that, because all it's doing is representing down below whatever I typed up above. Until you throw that equal sign in there, it's not calculating. It's just replicating. Whatever's up here is down here. If I type banana, it's going to say banana. That's it. Okay, so moving around in the window. I like keyboards. Having to reach all the way over to that mouse just slows me down. So if you're in ready mode, if you see down here in the corner it says ready, use your arrow keys on your keyboard, up and down, left and right on the keyboard with the arrows. So you're moving around. Now, hold down the Shift key on your keyboard and use an arrow key. And what's it doing?
It's highlighting.
It's highlighting and selecting. Okay?
You're the man.
Now let go of the Shift key and position your mouse and hold down the Control key on your keyboard and hit the down arrow. What did it do? Yeah, it jumped to the next blank. If you right arrow with the Control key, it'll jump to the blank. If you're on, and here's something fun. There are more than 1 million rows. If you start on this thing, G, gross pay, and you Control down arrow, I'm at the bottom of the world. I'm at 1,048,576. I'm all the way down there. But don't panic, just Control up arrow, and you'll be back up again at the start. Okay. And there are more than 10,000 columns also. It goes way out to the right. So you can Control arrow and stuff like that. Okay, now the last cool thing, and you'll get used to this the more you do it. If you do Control and Shift, it does both. It jumps and highlights. So if I start here and I Control Shift, hold them both down, right arrow, it jumps and highlights. Still holding Control and Shift, I down arrow, it jumps and highlights. And I've just selected that whole range of data. It's not that impressive when you've only got 10 rows, but if you've got 300 rows, that's a time saver. If I want to highlight all my data, just Control Shift down arrow and I jump to the last thing. And there you go. Sheet tabs. I called this a workbook. Right now there's only one sheet in it. So it's a book with only one page. If you use this plus to add new sheets, you'll see that new sheets just appear next to the other sheet. Every one of these sheets has more than 1 million rows and, all those thousands of columns. So a workbook can contain a lot of information. So a workbook is a bunch of sheets, or it could just be one, but the main thing is that they're all saved under one name, and they're all located in one file. Okay. When I close this, no matter how many worksheets I've got in here, it's going to show up in my file structure here as one file with one name. That one. Scroll bar, you probably know this just from using the internet. Over here you've got a scroll bar that lets you drag it up and down, or click on the little arrow and move up and down. And then the same thing for left and right. So if I have something way over here, I type something, hello, and now I jump back over here. Now you can see that I've got a lot more area to scroll through to get to the other thing. So if I keep using this, eventually I'll get over there and find hello. There it is, over in AO7 or 6 or whatever I'm in. Yeah. So if you think to yourself, why is my worksheet so big? Maybe you've got something stuck out at the margin somewhere, like way off in the distance. Okay. So scroll bars work in the way that you might expect. Okay. Oh, and another interesting thing. See this little area down here at the bottom? Watch what happens when I just highlight a bunch of numbers. Let's just do this. So if I highlight all my OT pay numbers, a bunch of stuff appeared down here without my even asking it to. So it gives me my average quickly. It gives me a count of how many numbers, and it also adds them all up. So I didn't even have to write a formula to get that answer. So if you quickly want to say, yeah, well, how much did we pay everybody in straight time this week? If I do this, I can look at the bottom and say, we paid him $5,800, and change. So without my even having to do anything, it'll give me the adding up. And it'll also say, well, and on average, our 10 employees each made $580 a week, or this week, whatever it was. So that's another little thing that shows up down below. I already showed you the little zoom in, zoom out, plus and minus things down here. And then the last term they wanted me to tell you is range. A range of cells is just that's a range of cells. Anything more than one cell is a range of cells. And because it's a grid of columns, that's a column, that's a column, that's a column, and rows. Okay, you guys understand a row is sideways and a column is up and down?
Yeah.
Okay, because it's a bunch of grids like this, any range of cells can be defined like a boxing ring by its opposite corners. Okay? So this is the range of cells B5 to F14. If you say range B5 to F14, it implies the whole square. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. And that'll be useful in a formula too, because if I want to, and I'll quickly skip ahead here and do something we're going to do later. There's a special kind of formula called sum that lets you put in a range of cells. So if I say sum E5 colon E14, that's defined a range of cells. And sum is going to do what it says. It's going to add them up. Ta-da! That's a familiar number because we also saw that same number down here when we highlighted that range. But if you do that, it's a lot quicker. Of course, you could do it the long way. Equals E5 plus E6 plus E7 plus E8. You could do that, right? And it'll start adding, and it will add them all up. But it's a lot quicker to say equals sum and give the range. Plus E9 plus E10. I could do that, right? And it'll just keep adding those things up. Now let me just say I'm going to add those up.
Yes.
Until you hit enter, you're still in edit mode, and you don't see the little edit down here. I'm still in edit mode, and I don't see the answer. Plus E11 plus E12, etc. E13 plus E14. So you could do it that way and get the answer, but it's really quicker to say equals sum, and then you can drag the range with your mouse and then hit enter, and it'll do that. So, but definitely what you don't do is equals 670 plus 420 plus 530. You don't do that, right? You don't add up the actual numbers. That's a chump way. That's not how you're going to do this in Excel. You always use the cell addresses. Okay? If I wanted to add up those two numbers, I would say equals E5 plus E6. Or equals sum E5, E6. And add them up that way. Okay, these are what are called the arithmetic operators. It just means those are the little symbols that you use in your formula to do these things. So plus and minus look normal, but for multiply you have to use the little asterisk or star. So the formula would look like that for multiply. Okay. For dividing, instead of using that little division symbol that we learned in school, you use the slash. So equals A5 slash A7 is A5 divided by A7. You guys with me? Okay. And then percent, and then most of us don't use exponents in our normal life unless we're mathematicians or scientists. So mostly the ones you're going to care about are these 5 arithmetic operators. Okay. Enter labels and values and use the auto sum button. So now we get to actually do a little bit of what I've been telling you about. So what I'm going to invite you guys to do, and I'll do it too, is go ahead and just take this page called Enter Labels and Values, this one, and follow its steps in your own worksheet, and I'll be doing it up here at the same time. Are you with me? So click in A15. Then when it says click in the formula bar, I'm going to click up here in the formula bar. Then I'm going to type a label, totals. Okay, something that I always do, just because it's how I learned it, I always hit enter on the keyboard instead of coming up here and clicking with my mouse on the little check mark. That's another way of doing enter. The difference between my way on the keyboard and this way is that when I type something up here and I hit enter on the keyboard, it jumps me down one. If you type up here and then you click this check mark, it keeps you right where you are. That's the only difference. Okay, once you've entered the word totals, then you want to click the next cell over, B15. We want this to add up these things. And you might even think that you have to type equals sum da da da, which is good practice. But there's this button up here on the home tab in the editing group called auto sum. If you click that little auto sum button, ta-da, then hit enter. It just threw the formula in there to add up all of these numbers. Okay, then what they want us to do is just change her OT hours from 5 to 6. So if you do this, all you have to do is right here from ready mode, just type the number 6 and it'll overwrite whatever was in there. That's important. So if you don't mind overwriting everything in the cell, just click on it and type something and you're good to go. But if you want to go in there and tinker with it without wiping it out, you're going to have to, go in and either come up here and click on it or double click on it and move around in the cell. It's more complicated for me to say it than for you to just play with it, so you'll get used to that, don't worry. Okay, then in cell C18, way down here, I'm typing another label, average gross pay. Okay, now this last thing, number 8, I've got a formula here. And something interesting is about to happen. When I point my mouse pointer at this little box, watch what happens. Fluffy white plus sign. Solid black plus sign. Fluffy white. Solid black. Do you see the difference?
Yeah.
Okay, when it's in the solid black mode, you're over what's called the fill handle. You grab that handle by clicking and holding with your mouse, and then you drag it over, and it's going to, it did a bunch, right? So it took that formula, which says, add up all of these numbers above me, and it copied it into all of these. So now all of these are adding up all the numbers above them. To do that, it had to do something kind of special. And I know we're going to get into this when we get to the formulas chapter. But the thing it did that was neat was, look up here at the formula bar while I arrow right and go over all these. Some B5, B14, some C5, some D5, some E5, some F5, some G5, right? So it changed the formula to refer to a new range of cells when the calculation moved. That's called a relative cell reference. It just means I'm referring to some cells here. I'm referring to those cells. A relative cell reference means that when this thing moves, what it's referring to moves relative to it. It keeps the same orientation compared to the formula. So now you've seen what the fill handle can do really fast. It can copy a formula all across. You can also do the same thing in the other direction. Like if you had numbers in a column, you could also drag it downward. The fill handle works in any direction. Okay, step 9, save your work. So I should probably, okay, there is a little thing. It still looks like a floppy disk. Nobody uses those anymore. If you click save, which is that button, or Control S on your keyboard does the same thing. You know me, I love the keyboard. So save is Control plus S. Okay. All right. They're saying that if you want to edit a cell, there are a couple of ways you can do it. In A5, Like suppose the guy didn't spell his name in that European way, but the regular American way. If you click, you can either click in the formula bar, and you guys know about the difference between delete and backspace? Look what happens when I hit the delete key. You see where my little blinker is right here? If I hit the delete key, it deletes the letter to which side? The right. If I hit the backspace key, it deletes the letter to which side? The left. Okay, so the delete key deletes to the right, the backspace key deletes to the left. So wherever your insertion point is, if I wanted to get rid of the I, what would I hit here?
Delete.
Delete, right. So it'll delete what's to the right. I'm used to just hitting enter on the keyboard. They suggest clicking this. The only difference is that this keeps me in one place, whereas this, hitting enter with my keyboard, drops me down one cell. Okay, click cell B6 and hit F2. All that hitting F2, which is up here at the top of your keyboard on the top row, all that hitting F2 does is get you into edit mode. It puts the little blinking thing in here so you can edit it. That can be, for those of us who like the keyboard, that's a nice thing. They want me to make, they want me to make a change? Yeah, they want me to change the 35 to 38. So just backspace over the 5, type the 8, and then hit enter key, and it jumps me down one. Notice that when the number of hours for Lucia changed, the totals also adjusted accordingly because it's not adding up the number, it's adding up the place. Cell A9. Juan Martinez. His name isn't Juan. His name is Javier. So we're double clicking the word Juan. And if you keep double clicking, eventually it'll highlight the whole name. Then I can type in a different name and then hit enter. Double click, it says C12. Hit the delete key because it's to the right. Type in a different number, which in this case they're suggesting the number 4. So these are all just ways of editing what was in the cell. Down in the lower right of page 11, I already showed you the fluffy white plus sign and the solid black plus sign. There are the other ways that a mouse pointer can look. Column resize, the last one, is the one I want to show you. Up here, if I need to make this not spill over, see how project leader division is spilling over into column B? I can just hover my mouse between A and B and it changes to the two-headed arrow. I can drag it wide, drag it narrow, or double click. If I double click, it'll size it so it fits. So if I make it too narrow and I get the two-headed arrow and I double click, boom boom, it'll size to fit. The same thing is true of rows. If a row gets too tall or too short, I can go between the row numbers and double click and it'll size that down. Same way. And then you already have seen this enter and edit a simple formula. I've already kind of covered this. The interruption box at the bottom of this page talks about the named range. The only thing that a named range does is let you have a shortcut way of referring to a bunch of data. So for instance, if I wanted to say, give this range of hours a name, I would highlight them, I would click in the name box, and then I would type a name. So if I wanted to call them ST hours for straight time hours, that means that now that range of cells has a name, ST hours. Why would I need that? Because then I could make a formula that says equals average ST hours. And it would understand that that was this range of cells. And it would average them out. So I don't tend to naturally use that very much, But in a big, complicated spreadsheet, it can be great. Because then you don't have to keep going back over and going, where are those cells? You just know the names that you want to do, and then you can type in the names. Obviously, it's the same thing as doing what range of cells. What would I type right here? You'd start with B5. That's true. Then you would type a colon, and you would put in the last value, or the other end of that range. B14, that's right. So B5 colon B14. And it doesn't care about upper or lower case. If you put in a lowercase b or an uppercase b, it's the same thing. So that'll do the same stuff. So named range or regular range, ST hours. Worksheet views. So down below here, there are some view buttons down near the zoom. There's one called Page Layout View. If you click on that, you'll see what it would look like on a piece of paper. When you go to print something, these little lines that are between your cells are called grid lines. That's the name they use for them. Here's a new concept that we haven't touched on before called header and footer. So a header is something, you'll notice it's kind of outside the regular grid on your page. This is something that on your paper, if you put something in the header, it'll show up on every printed page at the top of each page. You can also use, in the View tab, there are these buttons over here that are similar. There's Page Layout View is the one we were just in. There's also this thing called Page Break Preview, which shows you an even bigger area of your spreadsheet. What is this telling me? This is telling me that I added this little formula out here in I, whatever that is, 7. And it's telling me with its dotted line that that won't fit on my one page.
Right.
It's going to spill over and be a new page. There are things I can do about that if I want to include that, and I want to make my page scale down so the stuff crams onto it. You can get to that. Let me go here. So on the page layout, there's this area called Page Setup. Oh, this is another thing about the ribbon. See how I mentioned that this is called the group, like this is the alignment group, that's the number group, the styles group. Very often there's this little tiny button to the right of the name of the group. If I want you to go to the page setup dialog box, is what they call it. If you want to open the page setup menu, go to the page setup group and click this little tiny button. So if you click on that, this takes you into the page setup menu, and this looks like the menu that we used to have in the old version of Excel, as it turns out. So here's where you've got a fit to, how many pages wide by how many pages tall, and portrait versus landscape. Portrait is tall, landscape is wide, paper. So what would be a better fit for this?
Landscape.
Yeah, you would totally choose landscape. And if you want to size it down, you could say fit to 1 page wide. Another neat trick, probably my favorite thing about this page, is you can delete this and leave it blank. You can say squeeze it to 1 page wide, but let it be as many pages tall as it wants.
Okay.
So if you leave that blank and say OK, now you can see that it's going to fit on 1 page.
Couldn't you go back and just hit page preview, print preview?
You mean here?
Right there, yeah.
Yep, it would show me now what it would look like on a printed page. Is it going to print grid lines?
Nope.
Not unless I tell it to. So in that situation, I would go in here to my page setup, and I've got different tabs up here. On the sheet tab is where I can say print me my grid lines. If I do that and print preview, suddenly I've got grid lines. But without that, if I go to page setup, then you can say grid lines or no grid lines. The margins tab, it's just what it sounds like. So you can make the white space bigger or smaller at the top and the left and the right and the bottom. But this is probably the best thing. The thing I use the most, deciding if it's going to be landscape or portrait, and then fitting it or scaling it. This is the one I mostly use. I mostly want it to be 1 page wide and let it be as tall as it wants. Printing the formulas, that's something I didn't mention. If you want to show the formulas instead of the results, let me go back to the view normal. So I'm back to my normal view. You can also do that again with this button down in the lower right called normal. So right now, I can't see the formulas if I print it. Maybe I want to show someone what formulas I used. We're going to go to the tab called Formulas. And then up here in this area called Formula Auditing, there's this thing called Show Formulas. Look at that.
You're the man.
So if you click that, it'll show you all the formulas, and it'll actually print out and you can see them. Now my type's going to get awfully small because I've got to squeeze all that stuff into 1 page wide. But that's showing the formulas, and then if you click it again, it'll turn it back to normal. So that's important.